Brew day is something to look forward to. Lots of planning, making sure things are ready, and then the action begins. Once I start my boil, I'm glued to the pot. I hover and make sure everything is done just right. Occasionally, a minor, sometimes major, disaster livens things up even more. But if you're like me, once the boil is finished, the wort is cooled, and in the fermenter, it's just really anticlimactic. You just sit there and stare, waiting for that first bubble from the air trap. Because until that happens, you really don't know if things are okay or not. The hydrometer is the standard instrument for the home brewer. A novice can tell when to rack and when to bottle based on a recipe recommended gravity. A seasoned pro can tell you a lot about your brew if you supply a few gravity readings. But take 4 readings 1 hour apart and you won't see much of a difference. Probably none. So if there's anything going on that you should know about, you're not going to get it that way. Your air trap is also a valuable tool, and you can get some additional information by observing the rate of bubble production. But it is hard to tell subtle differences because you are just eyeballing it. There is no real scale to measure by. Maybe bubbles per minute, but it is hard to quantify. For instance, what is the difference between this or this? Or this? Or how about this? The fact is, we are really flying by the seat of our pants. Let's say that there is some condition that is affecting yeast production, and your brew is in the process of stalling. The bubbles might not show this right away, and even if you were taking hourly gravity readings, which no one would recommend, you would not see anything right away. This is a case, however, when the earlier you act, the more likely you are to recover. You could pitch some more yeast, add some foo-foo dust, whatever. But if you don't know there is a problem, you're not going to act. It's a terrible feeling knowing that you really don't know what is going on with any certainty. This is where Brew Nanny offers a dramatically different experience. Brew Nanny takes the place of the traditional air trap in your fermenter. And you can take that quite literally. You put it in the fermenter and you are done. No calibration or anything like it is necessary. The major improvement over the air trap is that as CO2 is released, it is measured very accurately. These measurements are sent to a microcontroller that organizes and stores the data. If measurements indicate that there is a problem with the brew, an alert is sent via text message or email. When you receive these alerts, you can log on to your Brew Nanny dashboard and get up-to-the-minute data that is presented in a meaningful, actionable way. The dashboard can be accessed by any device with a web browser or through a special app for Apple and Android devices. So exactly how does this work? Yeast eat the sugar in your wort. As a byproduct, CO2 and alcohol are produced. Usually we just vent the CO2 out into the air, and when it comes to monitoring the beer, we use a hydrometer to determine how much sugar has turned into alcohol. Brew Nanny flips this principle on its head. It's just basic chemistry. For each sugar molecule that is fermented, a specific amount of CO2 and alcohol are produced. If you can measure the amount of CO2 released, then you can determine, with a little math, how much alcohol has been produced. If you know how much sugar you started with, and a few other details, you can then determine all kinds of things about your beer, such as the current alcohol content, the rate of fermentation, how much more sugar needs to be converted into alcohol, and when the beer should be finished. We know that the rate of fermentation changes throughout the brewing process. We can profile the rate of fermentation based on the recipe ingredients. So as the beer ferments, with our precision readings, we can tell if things are going as they should. Brew Nanny also has other sensors that measure temperature and light levels. Add all these things up, and you can know a lot more about your beer than you ever could with a hydrometer and an air trap. All this information can be at your fingertips, whether you're in the room with your beer or anywhere in the world where you have a cell phone or internet access. Brewing beer will never be the same. The amount of information you're about to have at your fingertips is unlike anything that you have ever experienced. The dashboard viewer is free software that connects to your BrewNanny, and it runs on most devices, so you can use your existing laptop, tablet, or even your phone. BrewNanny acts like its own website, giving you access to all the data available about your beer wherever you are. Let's take a closer look at the BrewNanny dashboard and how it will help you make better decisions about your beer. The BrewNanny dashboard is the one central location for all of your brewing information. On the left-hand side of the screen are two temperature gauges. BrewNanny measures the temperature of the liquid inside the fermenter. It also measures the air temperature where your fermenter sits. Why two measurements? Well, the liquid temperature is important, and we want to know if it gets too hot or too cold. But your beer isn't going to change temperature all by itself. We want to know if anything has changed in the room where the fermenter sits. If, for instance, a window was opened, a heater or air conditioning unit has been turned off, or anything that changes the temperature of the environment around your fermenter, you want to know about this change as soon as it happens, way before your beer temperature starts to change. The second thermometer measures this ambient temperature and can alert you well before the liquid temperature starts to change. Think of the air temperature readings as an early warning system for your beer. The temperature gauge has color-coded ranges to indicate at what temperature we want to be alerted. The green area is the OK range. Any reading here is fine. The yellow area is the warning range. If the temperature creeps into this range, we want to be notified. The red area is the alarm range. If the temperature makes it into this range, there is a serious problem and we want to be alerted immediately. These ranges are automatically set depending on the type of beer you are brewing. A different range for lager or for an ale, but you can adjust them to any reading you want. BrewNanny replaces the air trap that you normally use with a valve and a pressure sensor. The valve closes the fermenter vessel to allow pressure to build up to a predetermined setting. The pressure sensor accurately reads this pressure, and when the reading reaches the desired level, the valve opens, releasing a measured amount of CO2. The pressure data is sent to this pressure gauge on the dashboard so that you can visually monitor the activity level of the fermentation. As you can see, the pressure builds steadily and then releases at the same pressure in a regular pattern. This is similar to watching the bubble activity in a conventional air trap, but the air trap just releases the CO2. BrewNanny takes exact measurements and uses this data to calculate some very helpful information that gives us insights into what is going on behind the scenes. BrewNanny also measures the amount of light from the inside of your fermenter. The light sensor used is extremely sensitive and can be used to trigger alarms when it gets too high. Once again, the gauge is color-coded, so it is easy to see when things are okay. These dials and gauges give us a nice view of the measurements that BrewNanny is making in real time. But sometimes we need a way to look at what has been going on at an earlier time, when we weren't there. And this is one of the best features of BrewNanny. All of the readings are stored and you can view them anytime you want to. The histogram panel gives us a graphical view of all of that has happened so far in the brewing process. We can view a lot of information here, and when all viewed at once, it can be a bit overwhelming. So we can turn each individual reading off and on by clicking the color squares here in the legend, so we can concentrate on the readings we are concerned with. We can also control the amount of time that we were displaying on the graph. Clicking each one of these buttons on the bottom of the graph changes the length of time each reading represents. Clicking the 1 hour button changes the graph so that each reading or bar represents the average data reading for a 1 hour period. So the entire graph, having 12 bars, represents 12 hours of total time. If you hover over a bar or line, the data is displayed along with the reading date and time. We can then use the arrow keys to look backward and forward in time to view the part of the fermentation that we want. We can select different buttons to change the amount of time each bar represents, effectively zooming in or out on the readings. Some readings make more sense if they are displayed as a line instead of a bar. The Brunani dashboard has default settings that display CO2 volume as bars and the rest of the readings as line graphs. But you can change from bar to line to any number of other formats in your control settings if you want. Or you can keep things the way they are. We will explore some of the more advanced features in another movie, so let's scroll down and look at the other half of the Brunani dashboard. The bottom section is more concerned with calculations and messages. The bottom panel is divided into 3 sections. The far left contains calculations. The center section contains a log of all the events that have occurred, and the section on the far right is a notepad for you to jot down things that you think will be important to review later on. Just click in the window and start typing. Your messages are saved automatically. So the next time you have a brilliant idea, you can jot it down here, or you could just use it for your shopping list if you want. The calculations section gives you a precision look at some of the more technical aspects of your beer. Each of these individual blocks can be moved around so you can position them in a way that makes sense to you. In your settings panel, you can change which calculations show anytime you want. Let's look at a few of the ones displayed here. All of these panels are updated several times per second, so the data is always current. The gravity and percent alcohol calculations tell you how far the fermentation has progressed. These readings are combined with the recipe data to estimate how much more sugar needs to be converted into alcohol and CO2. The time to go calculation gives you a good idea of when it will be time to either rack to secondary or get ready to bottle or keg. The release counter tells you how many times the CO2 valve was opened. These 2 blocks tell you the time since the last release and the time until the next one. Remember, these releases are similar to the burps you would get from a traditional air trap. But the difference here is that we are measuring the amount of CO2 that is released very accurately and use this information to determine many of the other readings presented to you. Right now the fermentation is very active, so these counters are cycling very fast. But when your beer is a few minutes old, these readings can be very reassuring. Since the pressure sensors are so sensitive that they compensate for the temperature of the beer and the air in the fermenter, it shows you immediately when the fermentation is starting and producing CO2. Imagine not having to sit there waiting for that first bubble. You can be off doing other things, and Brunani will send you text messages when the pressure first starts, when the first release occurs, and can also let you know that the amount of activity going on is within the range of a healthy batch of beer. No more worrying and second guessing. Keep the lid on the fermenter and let Brunani tell you what is going on. Brunani started out as a small personal project for me a few years ago. I'm an IT professional. I commute a total of 3 hours a day, have a wife, kids, 2 dogs. Trying to brew beer while managing the rest of my life isn't always the easiest thing in the world. Frankly, there are times when I have beer brewing in the basement that I totally forget about. So I just wanted to give my beer a chance. I wanted it to be able to scream at me when it needed something, just like everything else in my life. So in my case, necessity was the mother of invention, and I was well motivated to find a solution. I worked every day on the project for about 1.5 years. I found a lot of ways that it didn't work. One of my favorite sayings by Winston Churchill is, "Success is moving from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm." I love those words because it's hard to do anything really well without falling down a lot. But I persevered, and I believe I have a great product. I made a lot of proof of concept models and finally got a design that worked the way I wanted it to. Then I made my first prototype. It was ugly, but I was so proud of it I took a picture and posted it on Facebook. A lot of my friends said, "Boy, that's really ugly, you shouldn't put that up there. People will think you don't know what you're doing." But I have some other photos that show how the design improved along the way. The final design has a simple, minimalistic look and only one moving part. I produced a small lot in a beta run, and they look and work pretty much like the final product will. The only differences might be some final tweaks to the software. These prototypes have been added to the array of working test batches we have going here at my shop. They were used to make the dashboard series in this video while brewing beer. And the best is yet to come. Much of the functionality of Brunani is in the software that can be upgraded easily. I hope that the project will attract some developers and makers that will build on what I have here with new software modules, add-on products, and whatever else they can come up with. This is a collaborative project. I want to hear from you about your ideas on how to make Brunelli better. This will be reflected on our website as it evolves from a product announcement site to a collaborative clearinghouse for information about what people are doing with Brunelli and new ideas that everyone can contribute to. So that's my story. Happy brewing.